Coronavirus has tanked auto sales in the United States. Automakers are worried and desperate for buyers. The virus has spurred governments to enact shelter-in-place orders that are keeping consumers away from stores and dealerships. Markets have plummeted. People everywhere are losing their jobs. The virus struck the automotive industry after several years of record sales. But it also came just a decade after the industry essentially collapsed in the financial crisis. Now, car makers are once again facing a potentially catastrophic threat, and this time it happens to be something the industry has never grappled with before. Auto companies are taking drastic measures to induce potential customers to keep shopping, and those who follow the industry are looking at other crises for clues as to how it might respond. Both the financial crisis of 2008 and the fallout from the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 prompted car makers to enact aggressive incentive programs to draw customers out in times when they were otherwise deeply hesitant to purchase the new cars they wanted or very often needed to live their lives. And industry analysts say these companies may need to use some of those tools again to hold off another collapse. So what did they do then, and what are they doing now? In the wake of the September 11th attacks on New York City, the confidence of the American consumer plummeted. The US economy had shown signs it was entering a downturn months before the attacks took place, but the horrors of September 11th deeply shook the confidence of US citizens, whose spending accounted for about 2/3 of all goods and services, according to a speech given in December 2001 by Robert T. Perry, who was then president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. By undermining consumer confidence, the attacks hit directly at the economy's main pillar of support, Perry said at the time. In the months that followed the attacks, General Motors, the largest U.S. automaker, rolled out an unprecedented initiative to draw customers back into its dealerships. The Keep America Rolling campaign offered 0% financing for 36 months, then a common loan term. Automakers had offered incentives before, and perhaps an occasional deal offering 0% interest on a car loan was not totally unheard of. Such deals would have been used very sparingly by automakers or dealers. Also unprecedented was that GM offered the deal for vehicles across its entire lineup.
And GM more or less led the industry and said, we're going to bring 0% out to make sure that people felt comfortable about things like leaving their home, making a major transaction like a vehicle purchase, and the rebound for the auto industry was very quick.
But the years that followed 9/11 brought a housing crisis and an ensuing financial crisis that left U.S. automakers in dire straits. Both General Motors and Chrysler filed for bankruptcy in 2009. Only Ford managed to escape bankruptcy, but even the Blue Oval was badly damaged by the crisis and recession. In 2009, the federal government, which now owned large portions of both GM and Chrysler, instituted perhaps the most memorable incentive program of that time, the Cash Allowance Rebate System, commonly known as the Cash for Clunkers program. The $3 billion incentive program was designed to induce Americans to buy cars again, but it came with a few catches. Primarily, its goal was to try to shift consumers into more fuel-efficient vehicles.
It actually had two goals. One was to stimulate car sales, but at the same time, they wanted to stimulate a certain kind of sales, which was to transition the car industry from the old, less fuel efficient to a much more fuel efficient model.
To qualify, a buyer had to trade in a car that was less than 25 years old and in drivable condition. The car also had to be a gas guzzler, getting at least less than 18 miles per gallon. The new vehicle also had to cost no more than $45,000, so no supercars. The $3 billion set aside for the program ran out by the end of 2009, but its very nature as a plan to get buyers into greener cars meant that its appeal was limited.
You had to have qualifications on both ends. Both your trade had to qualify and what you bought had to qualify. So it really limited the effectiveness there. And the reality, though, is what happened is if you have a vehicle that was worth $2,000 or $3,000, the government would essentially give you that $4,200. So the value to consumers was about $2,000 of top off on their trade, but it cost taxpayers $4,000 because the vehicle was just crushed, and that $4,000 went into the deal from the government. So it was a very expensive program. It did stimulate sales, and it did move a lot of consumers out of gas guzzlers into more fuel-efficient vehicles, but at a pretty high cost per incremental sale.
At the time, some automakers also tried to drum up business by offering assurance incentives that told customers they would be all right if they missed some payments on a loan. This was effective for addressing low consumer confidence, which was rampant at the time, especially among those worried about losing their jobs. Korean carmaker Hyundai is said to have been one of the pioneers of assurance programs.
We will essentially waive forgiveness for X number of months if you're out of work, and either add that to the end of the term that you're under for your loan, or if at some point in time you're not comfortable, you can hand the car back. They'll take it back. So really gave people a comfort level about making a major purchase like that, even though their job or their income was somewhat unknown.
The new coronavirus and the circumstances it is forcing on the US economy are, of course, unlike anything US automakers have seen, even in their century-long history. When the US automotive industry was still very young, another disease did rage through the United States, the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. The Ford Motor Company had been founded just 15 years earlier in 1903. That pandemic did claim the life of one of the founding members of the Dodge brand still around today, John Dodge. His brother Horace also contracted the disease and never fully recovered. Both Dodge brothers were reputed to be heavy drinkers for much of their lives, and Horace died from cirrhosis a year later. But the world and the automotive business in 2020 is, of course, wildly different from what it was back then. Before coronavirus struck, auto industry experts had already expected auto sales to fall in 2020 compared with the previous year. The automotive business is a cyclical one, and sales rise and fall as the US economy expands and contracts. The last several years have seen sales at or near record levels. Total new light vehicle sales topped 17 million for 5 straight years. Sales in 2019 came in at 17.1 million units, topping most estimates which had predicted sales in the high 16 million range. In early February, industry forecaster LMC Automotive expected US new car sales for 2020 to be about 16.8 million units. Sales at the beginning of March 2020 were relatively strong, down just about 4% over the previous year. But just 1 week later, sales had plummeted by 38% compared with the same week in 2019. In the last week of March, sales had fallen by 61%. As of the first week of April, several automotive sales forecasters had expected sales for the full year to fall to around 14 million.
Sales through the beginning of March, for the first about week of March, were in fact quite strong. And then in one fell swoop, the coronavirus took over. The NBA canceled their season, the NCAA suspended its tournament, Tom Hanks got the coronavirus. Everything happened all at once, and sales that weekend fell to about 35% decline. We're talking about a decline like in the 08 recession that's kind of played out over several months, happening over 4 or 5 days. So the industry really had the wind knocked out of its sails pretty quickly in March.
As of April 2nd, 39 state governments had instituted stay-at-home orders for citizens, and many areas ordered non-essential businesses to close. That decision affected 265 million consumers, or approximately 80% of the population, according to J.D. Power. Within 2 days, that number had jumped to 41 states. By the same time, at least 5 states had temporarily banned any automotive sales. There is no template for understanding the full ramifications of the pandemic, economic or otherwise.
At the moment, what we've been, I think, sort of focused on, and you still hear from companies, are the supply chain disruptions, and it's more of a focus on kind of the supply shock from actually not having goods and trade coming from Asia. But what I'm what we're, I think, kind of more quickly shifting toward, which is far more worrisome, is that it actually begins to have an effect on consumer demand and consumer behavior. I mean, for me in the States, that's the biggest thing to be watching.
But those who follow the auto industry say the US consumer could see a sort of revival of GM's Keep America Rolling program, perhaps a Keep America Rolling 2. As of late March, automakers were already offering 0% financing on 84-month loans and even offering to defer payments for up to 6 months. Those deals are already unprecedented. Prior to coronavirus, any type of loan lasting 84 months was a rarity. In 2019, only 7% of loans lasted that long, according to J.D. Power. By the end of the last week of March 2020, 23% of all sales came with loans lasting 84 months. As with all incentive programs, not every customer will be able to receive such favorable terms. New vehicle loan interest rates can vary widely depending on a customer's credit score. An analysis from Cox Automotive shows that customers with the highest credit scores, those above 760, had typically paid interest rates averaging around 4%. This is prior to the virus. The customers on the lowest credit tier paid interest rates close to 19%. Some automakers are also once again offering payment protection to customers, as they have in the past. Many are trying to assure buyers that their loans won't be in jeopardy if their employment situation is unstable. Numbers released on April 3rd showed non-farm payrolls had fallen to levels near the worst seen during the financial crisis in 2009. But how long these types of incentives could last did remain an open question. One thing the coronavirus does stand to change, possibly for good, is the way consumers buy cars. Dealers were quick to respond to government stay-at-home orders by shifting sales online, a trend that had already been taking place in the automotive market. Many were offering customers vehicle delivery and other perks to make it easier to shop from home. Cox Automotive owns AutoTrader, an online marketplace for new and used cars. As of mid-April, about 7,000 dealers had enrolled in AutoTrader's home delivery service since it was introduced in late March.
DealerTrack, which is one of our Cox brands, sees their electronic contracting up 65% over where it was a year ago. So people have adopted these new technology tools, as well as dealers, and they're using them and feeling comfortable about making these purchases.
Regardless of the price they pay, the way consumers shop for cars could be fundamentally changed by the time the pandemic ends.